In this lesson, we're going to find the slope of the line connecting 2 points, the midpoint of the segment connecting the 2 points, and the distance between 2 points. We're going to look at this graphically, and then we'll look at it algebraically. First of all, slope. You may have heard of the slope equation. Slope equals rise over run. That tells us that we want to decide how far up or down we go from one point to another as we go from left to the right. So going from the point -4, -2, the rise would be going up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the run is the distance across that we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my slope is 4/3, 4 to 3. Algebraically, we denote slope with a small m. Algebraically, we can use the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I'll just call the point 2, 6 my y2, my x1, y1, my x2, y2, and my -4, -2, x1, y1. Subtracting the y's, I have 6 minus a -2 over 2 minus a -4. In this case, I have 8 over 6, which is still 4/3. For the midpoint of the segment, if I draw a segment between these 2 points, I'm looking for the point halfway between them. I might be able to count up and over and down and across and over to see that the midpoint would fall right here. It looks like the midpoint is going to be at -1, +2. To find it with algebra, I'm basically averaging the x's, adding them together and dividing by 2, and I'm averaging the y's. So my midpoint would be -2 over 2 is -1, 4 over 2, which is 2. Again, just averaging the x's and averaging the y's. The distance formula, algebraically, can be thought of as using the Pythagorean theorem, in which I have a right triangle. One side of the triangle is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The other side is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And using the Pythagorean theorem of a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I can let a be 6 and b be 8, and I can solve for the hypotenuse. 36 plus 64 is c squared. 100 equals c squared. If I take the square root, I get plus or minus the square root of 100, which is plus or minus 10. But since we're talking about distance, we can ignore the negative value. So c is 10, the hypotenuse is 10, the distance between the points is 10. We can also use the distance formula. The distance formula looks like this. The distance between the points is equal to the square root of the difference between the x's squared plus the difference between the y values squared. In using my example, I could have 2 minus a -4 squared plus 6 minus a -2 quantity squared. I would have 6 squared plus 8 squared, or the square root of 36 plus 64, square root of 100, which is 10. Notice the same numbers come up. We're really doing the same thing as the Pythagorean theorem. We just have a formula for it in this case. Let me give you an example or a practice problem. Using these 2 points, I would like you to try to find the slope, the midpoint, and the distance. Pause the video and come back when you have the answer. I'll use the formulas for this. In determining the slope, I'll subtract the y, 7 minus negative 5 over negative 4 minus 6, 12 over 10, actually 12 over negative 10, to get negative 6/5. So we're going down 12 and over 10, down being negative, over 10 being positive, the quotient being negative 6/5. For the midpoint, I can average the x's and average the y's. Negative 4 plus 6 all over 2, and 7 plus a negative 5 all over 2. 2 over 2, which is 1. 7 minus 5 is 2, over 2 is also 1. So the point 1, 1 is the midpoint. Looks like it's right here. So it looks reasonable. And for the distance, using the distance formula, the difference between the x's would be negative 4 minus 6 quantity squared. The difference between the y's would be 7 minus a negative 5 quantity squared. I have negative 10 quantity squared plus 12 quantity squared. Square root of 100 plus 144, or the square root of 244. If we break down the square root of 244 into the square root of 4 times the square root of 61, we get 2 root 61 in simplified radical form. So this lesson was on the slope, midpoint, and distance. The slope is basically the amount of rise or drop over the run. We can find it by subtracting the y's over the subtraction of x's. The midpoint is the average of the x's and average of the y's. And the distance between the points can be found using the Pythagorean theorem or the equivalent of that, which is the distance formula.